Michael Thompson had everything money could buy, but he was starving for something that couldn't be purchased. At 35, he owned 3 companies, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and enough wealth to buy small countries. Yet every night, he sat alone in his marble palace, wondering if anyone would love Michael the man instead of Thompson the billionaire. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Michael had invited 6 people he considered friends to his birthday dinner. As he watched them order the most expensive items on the menu and compete to flatter him, he realized something devastating. Not one person at that table knew his middle name. Not one had asked about his childhood or his dreams. They saw dollar signs where his heart should be. That night, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He called his longtime chauffeur, Stephen Smith, into his study. Stephen had worked for the Thompson family for 15 years, first driving Michael's father, then Michael himself. If anyone understood the weight of wealth and the loneliness it brought, it was Stephen. Michael explained his plan. He would shed his expensive clothes, move to a modest apartment across town, and live like an ordinary man. He would take a simple job, blend into everyday life, and see who would care about him when they thought he had nothing to offer. Stephen would still drive him, but in an old sedan instead of the usual luxury cars. They would tell people Stephen was helping out a friend who was going through tough times. Stephen listened without judgment. He had seen Michael grow from a privileged teenager into a man burdened by suspicious relationships and hollow friendships. The chauffeur understood that his boss was not running from responsibility, but toward authenticity. He agreed to help with one condition. If Michael found someone genuine, Stephen would speak up. He had watched too many good people get overlooked because Michael was too hurt to trust his own judgment. Within a week, Michael had transformed himself completely. Gone were the tailored suits and expensive watches. Instead, he wore simple jeans, plain shirts, and scuffed sneakers. He rented a small apartment above a bakery in a working-class neighborhood and took a job at a local bookstore. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, paid him minimum wage to shelve books and help customers. Michael had never worked for so little money, and he had never felt more hopeful. The experiment began immediately. At the coffee shop, where Michael grabbed his morning drink, the barista who had flirted shamelessly with him in his wealthy persona now barely glanced his way. Former acquaintances passed him on the street without recognition. The contrast was stark and painful, but also enlightening. Stephen picked him up each evening in a modest Honda Civic they had purchased for the charade. As they drove through the city, Stephen shared what he observed. The people who had once competed for Michael's attention now treated him like furniture. Business associates who had proclaimed their loyalty ignored his calls when they came from an unknown number. 3 weeks into the experiment, Michael was beginning to lose hope. He had encountered plenty of polite indifference, some outright rudeness, and several attempts at manipulation from people who thought they could use him as a stepping stone to something better. He was starting to wonder if genuine human connection was a myth when he met Sarah Williams. Sarah worked at the community center where Michael had started volunteering on weekends. She ran a program that taught basic computer skills to senior citizens, and she had the patience of a saint. Michael first noticed her when she spent 40 minutes helping an elderly man named Frank learn to send his first email to his granddaughter. She never showed frustration, never talked down to him, and celebrated his success like it was the most important thing in the world. When Sarah asked Michael if he wanted to help with the program, she did not try to impress him or extract information about his background. She simply explained that they needed someone who could be patient with people who found technology intimidating. Michael agreed, and for the first time in years, he felt useful for who he was rather than what he owned. Over the following weeks, Michael and Sarah worked together every Saturday. She brought homemade sandwiches and insisted on sharing them with everyone, including Michael. When he protested that she did not need to feed him, she laughed and said that food tasted better when it was shared. She asked about his week at the bookstore, listened when he talked about the customers he enjoyed helping, and never once inquired about his financial situation or future prospects. Stephen began to notice things about Sarah that Michael was too guarded to see. When Michael had a particularly difficult day at the bookstore dealing with a rude customer, Sarah somehow sensed his mood and brought him tea without being asked. When Michael mentioned that he was still adjusting to the neighborhood, She offered to show him the best places to buy groceries and where to get his clothes mended affordably. She never tried to fix his problems or offer advice he did not want. She simply made space for him to exist as he was. One evening, as Stephen drove Michael home from the community center, the chauffeur made an observation that stopped Michael cold. Sarah was the only person in Michael's current life who looked him in the eyes when she spoke to him. Everyone else, Stephen noted, looked slightly past him or through him, as if he were not quite worth their full attention. Sarah saw him. Michael began to pay closer attention to Sarah's actions. When an elderly woman in their computer class could not afford the bus fare home, Sarah quietly gave her money for a taxi and walked home herself. When Frank brought pictures of his granddaughter to show everyone, Sarah examined each one carefully and asked thoughtful questions. She remembered details about people's lives and followed up on things they had shared weeks earlier. More importantly, Sarah treated Michael with the same genuine interest and kindness she showed everyone else. She did not single him out or try to get closer to him than appropriate. She was simply herself, warm, honest, and present. Michael realized he was falling in love, not with someone who wanted to impress him, but with someone who had no idea she was impressive. The relationship developed slowly. Sarah and Michael began taking walks after their volunteer sessions, talking about books they had read, places they wanted to travel, and dreams they had for the future. Sarah shared that she had grown up in foster care and always felt grateful for small kindnesses from strangers. She worked as a nurse at a children's hospital during the week and volunteered on weekends because she believed in giving back to the community that had supported her. Michael found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone. He talked about feeling isolated, about struggling to know who to trust, about the loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who wanted something from him. He was careful not to reveal too much about his wealth, but he spoke honestly about his emotional experiences. Sarah listened without judgment and shared her own struggles with building trust after difficult experiences in her childhood. Stephen watched this relationship develop with growing certainty that Sarah was different from everyone else who had entered Michael's life. She never asked probing questions about Michael's background. She never suggested expensive activities or hinted that she wanted gifts. When Michael offered to pay for dinner on their first official date, she insisted they split the bill. When he suggested a fancy restaurant, she countered with a suggestion for a small family-owned place that she said made the best pasta in the city. The turning point came during their fourth date. Michael had had a terrible day at the bookstore. A customer had berated him for not being able to locate an obscure book quickly enough, and Mr. Peterson had criticized his shelving technique. Michael felt foolish for being upset about such small problems when he had the power to buy the entire bookstore chain, but the emotions were real nonetheless. Sarah sensed something was wrong the moment she saw him. Instead of trying to cheer him up or minimize his feelings, she suggested they skip their planned dinner and just walk by the river. They sat on a bench as the sun set, and Michael found himself talking about the frustration of being underestimated and dismissed. Sarah listened carefully, then shared a story about a patient who had made her question whether she was good enough to be a nurse. As they talked, Michael realized that Sarah was not trying to solve his problems or make him feel better with empty reassurances. She was simply being present with him in his difficult moment. She validated his feelings without making them about her own experiences. For the first time in his adult life, Michael felt truly seen and accepted. Stephen noticed the change in Michael immediately. His boss smiled more genuinely, laughed more freely, and seemed more at peace with himself. When Stephen asked how things were going with Sarah, Michael's entire demeanor softened. He talked about her kindness, her intelligence, and her ability to find joy in simple moments. Stephen realized that Michael was not just falling in love. He was becoming a better version of himself. The relationship deepened over the next month. Sarah and Michael spent their free time exploring the city's free museums, hiking in nearby parks, and cooking simple meals together in Michael's modest apartment. Sarah never complained about the lack of luxury or suggested expensive alternatives. She seemed genuinely content with their simple pleasures. One evening, Sarah arrived at Michael's apartment with a small potted plant. She explained that she had noticed his apartment felt a bit bare and thought some greenery might help. The plant had cost $3, but she presented it with the same joy someone else might have shown giving an expensive piece of jewelry. Michael was moved not by the gift itself, but by the thoughtfulness behind it and the fact that Sarah had been paying attention to his living space. As Michael cared for the plant over the following weeks, he found himself thinking about Sarah's approach to giving. She gave freely of her time, attention, and emotional support, but her material gifts were always modest and thoughtful. She seemed to understand instinctively that the value of a gift lay not in its price, but in the love and attention behind it. Stephen began to worry that Michael was waiting too long to be honest with Sarah about his true identity. The chauffeur could see that both Michael and Sarah were deeply in love, but he also recognized that the longer the deception continued, the more difficult it would be to reveal the truth. During one of their evening drives, Stephen gently suggested that Michael consider telling Sarah about his wealth. Michael's response revealed his deepest fear. He was terrified that Sarah would change once she learned the truth. He had seen it happen too many times before. People who seemed genuine and caring suddenly became calculating and demanding once they understood his financial situation. He could not bear the thought of seeing that transformation in Sarah's eyes. Stephen understood Michael's fear, but he also saw something Michael could not see clearly. Sarah's kindness was not selective or strategic. She treated everyone with the same warmth and respect, from the elderly volunteers at the community center to the homeless man who sometimes sat outside the bookstore. Her character was consistent across all situations and relationships. Stephen believed that Sarah would handle the truth with the same grace she brought to everything else, but he knew Michael needed to discover this for himself. The crisis came sooner than anyone expected. Michael's father, who had built a family fortune, suffered a heart attack and was hospitalized. Michael needed to return to his role as CEO immediately to handle the business crisis that ensued. He could not maintain his simple life while dealing with board meetings, media interviews, and the complex decisions required to stabilize the company. Michael was forced to tell Sarah that he needed to help his family with an emergency and might not be available for several weeks. He hated lying to her, but he was not ready to reveal the full truth. Sarah responded with characteristic kindness, expressing concern for his family and assuring him that she would be there whenever he was ready to reconnect. During the 3 weeks Michael spent handling the business crisis, Stephen continued to observe Sarah from a distance. She maintained her volunteer schedule at the community center, continued to bring extra food to share, and asked about Michael whenever she saw Stephen. Her concern seemed genuine and unselfish. She never pressed for details about Michael's situation or expressed frustration about his absence. She simply hoped he and his family were okay. When Michael finally returned to his simple apartment and his job at the bookstore, he was emotionally exhausted. The contrast between his two lives had never felt more stark. He had spent weeks making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue, then returned to shelving books for minimum wage. The disconnect was jarring, but it also clarified something important. His time with Sarah had been the most authentic and peaceful period of his adult life. Sarah welcomed Michael back without drama or demands for explanation. She had prepared his favorite tea and brought fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. As they sat together in his small apartment, Michael felt the tension of the previous weeks begin to dissolve. Sarah's presence was like a calm harbor after a storm. That evening, as they walked through the neighborhood, Sarah shared something that stopped Michael in his tracks. She said she had been thinking about their relationship while he was away, and she realized something important. She was falling in love with him not because of what he might become or what he might provide, but because of who he was in the present moment. She loved his patience with difficult customers, his genuine interest in other people's stories, and his ability to find contentment in simple pleasures. Michael was deeply moved by Sarah's declaration, but it also intensified his guilt about the deception. That night, after Sarah had gone home, he called Stephen and admitted he was ready to tell her the truth. He was terrified of losing her, but he could not build a real relationship on a foundation of lies. Stephen had been waiting for this moment. He told Michael something he had observed, but never shared. During Michael's absence, Sarah had asked Stephen if there was anything she could do to help Michael's family. She had offered to bring food, run errands, or simply be available if anyone needed support. Stephen had been touched by the offer and impressed by Sarah's selflessness. She was thinking about Michael's well-being even when she did not fully understand his situation. The conversation with Stephen gave Michael the courage he needed. He invited Sarah to dinner at his apartment the following evening and prepared to tell her everything. He cooked her favorite meal, opened a modest bottle of wine, and tried to imagine how to begin the most important conversation of his life. Sarah arrived with her usual warmth and presence. She complimented the dinner and asked about his day at the bookstore. As they ate, Michael found himself studying her face, trying to memorize every detail in case this was the last time she would look at him with love and trust. After dinner, Michael took Sarah's hands and began to speak. He told her that he had not been completely honest about his life. He explained that he was not actually struggling financially, but was quite wealthy. He described his decision to live simply in order to find genuine relationships and admitted that he had been testing people's reactions to him when they thought he had nothing to offer. Sarah listened quietly as Michael revealed the full truth about his identity, his wealth, and his reasons for the deception. He watched her face carefully, looking for signs of the transformation he feared. Instead, he saw something unexpected. Sarah looked thoughtful, then sad, then understanding. When Michael finished speaking, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question that revealed everything about her character. She wanted to know if Michael was happy living as his true self, or if he felt trapped by his wealth and the expectations that came with it. Michael realized that Sarah's first concern was not about the money or the deception, but about his emotional well-being. She was not calculating what his wealth might mean for her, but considering what it meant for him. Her response confirmed everything Stephen had observed about her character. Sarah admitted that she was hurt by the deception, but she understood why Michael had felt it necessary. She asked thoughtful questions about his experiences with insincere relationships and the loneliness of being valued for wealth rather than character. She did not express anger or excitement about the revelation, but rather a deep empathy for the difficult position Michael had been in. As they talked through the night, Sarah made something clear that touched Michael profoundly. She said that learning about his wealth did not change how she felt about him, but it did help her understand some of the sadness she had sensed in him. She had fallen in love with a man who patiently helped elderly people learn to use computers, who listened to her stories about difficult days at the hospital, and who found joy in simple walks through the neighborhood. That man was real, regardless of his bank account. Sarah did ask for one thing: complete honesty going forward. She said she could handle any truth about Michael's life, but she could not build a relationship on lies or partial truths. Michael agreed immediately, feeling a relief so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Over the following weeks, Michael slowly integrated his two lives. He continued volunteering at the community center and working at the bookstore, but he also returned to his responsibilities as CEO. Sarah met his business associates and attended some of his professional functions, but she remained unchanged. She was polite and appropriate in wealthy social settings, but she never seemed impressed by luxury or eager to take advantage of Michael's resources. Stephen watched this transition with satisfaction and admiration. He had been right about Sarah's character, but even he was impressed by her consistency. She continued to bring homemade sandwiches to the community center, split restaurant bills with Michael, and choose thoughtful but modest gifts. When Michael offered to buy her expensive jewelry or take her on lavish vacations, she gently declined, explaining that such things felt wrong to her while so many people struggled with basic needs. The relationship between Michael and Sarah deepened in ways that surprised them both. Sarah's influence helped Michael become more generous with his wealth, supporting causes they both cared about and finding ways to help people without creating dependency. Michael's resources allowed Sarah to expand her volunteer work and pursue additional training as a nurse practitioner. Most importantly, Michael discovered that being loved for his true self was even better than he had imagined. Sarah knew about his worst days at the office, his insecurities about relationships, and his struggles with the responsibility of wealth. She loved him not in spite of these challenges, but as a complete person who happened to include them. Stephen continued to work for Michael, but their relationship had evolved as well. Michael now valued Stephen's insights about people and situations, recognizing that his chauffeur's observations had been crucial in helping him find real love. Stephen took pride in having played a role in bringing together two people who genuinely belonged with each other. The proposal, when it came, was characteristically simple and meaningful. Michael asked Sarah to marry him not at an expensive restaurant or exotic location, but in the community center where they had first worked together. He presented her with a modest ring that had belonged to his grandmother, explaining that he wanted her to have something with family history rather than something flashy and new. Sarah said yes, but not before making Michael laugh, by asking if he was sure he was ready to be married to someone who would always choose the practical option over the luxurious one. Michael assured her that her practical nature was one of the things he loved most about her. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the same community center where they had met. Stephen served as best man, and Sarah's foster family attended along with a few close friends from the hospital and the bookstore. Michael's business associates were notably absent, replaced by people who had come to know and love the couple for who they truly were. As Michael and Sarah exchanged vows, Stephen reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Michael had been willing to risk everything to find authentic love, and Sarah had proven worthy of that risk. The chauffeur had played a small but crucial role by recognizing Sarah's genuine nature before Michael was ready to trust his own judgment. In the months following their marriage, Michael and Sarah found a balance that worked for both of them. They lived comfortably but not ostentatiously, traveled modestly but meaningfully, and continued to volunteer at the community center every Saturday. Michael discovered that sharing his life with someone who loved him completely made every aspect of that life richer and more purposeful. Sarah continued to work as a nurse and pursue her goal of becoming a nurse practitioner. She never seemed interested in becoming a society wife or giving up her career to manage Michael's social obligations. Instead, she brought her compassion and practical wisdom to every aspect of their shared life, making Michael a better leader and a happier man. Stephen remained with the family, but his role had expanded beyond driving to include serving as Michael's most trusted advisor on matters involving people and relationships. Michael had learned to value emotional intelligence as much as business acumen, and Stephen possessed both in abundance. The story of Michael and Sarah became a reminder that authentic relationships require authenticity from both people involved. Michael's willingness to be vulnerable and Sarah's consistency of character had created something rare and valuable. Their love was built on a foundation of genuine compatibility, mutual respect, and shared values rather than convenience, status, or financial benefit. Years later, when friends asked Michael how he had found true love, he always gave credit to Stephen for recognizing Sarah's special qualities before he had been wise enough to see them himself. He had learned that sometimes the people who know us best can see what we need before we can see it ourselves. The greatest gift of Michael and Sarah's relationship was not the happiness it brought them, but the way it changed their approach to all relationships. Michael became more generous with his trust and more discerning about the difference between genuine connection and superficial flattery. Sarah became more confident in her worth as a partner and friend, knowing that someone had chosen to love her completely. Their story proved that real love is not about finding someone who is impressed by what you have, but about finding someone who appreciates who you are. It is about being seen and valued for your character, your kindness, and your capacity for growth rather than your achievements, possessions, or status. Stephen often thought about the role he had played in bringing Michael and Sarah together. He had done nothing more than pay attention and speak truthfully about what he observed. Sometimes, he realized, the most important thing we can do for someone we care about is help them see what is right in front of them. The lesson of Michael's journey was not that wealth is meaningless, but that it is meaningless without genuine human connection. Money can buy comfort, security, and opportunities, but it cannot buy the peace that comes from being truly known and loved. That peace can only be found through the courage to be authentic and the wisdom to recognize authenticity in others. As Michael and Sarah built their life together, they often reflected on the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. Michael's desperate search for genuine love and Sarah's natural kindness had created the perfect conditions for real connection. Stephen's careful observation and loyal friendship had provided the bridge between Michael's fear and his hope. Their happiness was not the fairy tale ending of a poor girl marrying a rich man, but the deeper satisfaction of two people finding their perfect complement in each other. They had each brought their whole selves to the relationship and discovered that they were stronger, kinder, and more fulfilled together than either could have been alone. What would you have done if you discovered that someone you loved had been deceiving you about their wealth and identity? Would you have been able to see past the lie to the authentic person underneath? Or would the betrayal have been too much to forgive? The answers to these questions reveal as much about our own capacity for love and understanding as they do about the people around us. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the Beyond Yesterday YouTube channel for more stories of love, redemption, and the courage to seek authentic human connection in a complicated world.